So it's time for the next in our series of how to become a better 40k player. I'm going to be chatting to Lewis today, and we're going to be talking about pre-game planning, guys. Now, this is really, really important stuff. We're going to be going over exactly what questions you need to ask your opponent when you come up to the table. We're going to be talking threat ranges, and we're going to be talking overall game planning. Now, I think this is the most important video in the series. So, I hope you enjoy, guys. And remember, we do regular tactics content on this channel. It's all aimed at making you a better 40k player. So, check out our other videos and remember to subscribe. Enjoy. Welcome, guys. It's Andy and Lewis here from D6 Evolution.
Hi, guys.
So today we're talking about a really, really important subject. We're talking about pre-game planning.
Indeed.
Now, guys, this is absolutely key. Now, this is the second in our series of how to become a better 40k player. The first one was on list design and list building, and that's a really good episode. We'll link it down in the show description as well. So, buddy, do you want to take us off?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we were planning out the series of how to be a better 40k player, we were thinking about lots of different elements and what was important. And for me, I think pre-game planning is up there with the most important things you can actually do to influence your game. I kind of set it out a bit like this. If you had a long time to prepare for one game, so you had 3 months to prepare for one game and you knew who you were playing, you could play it through 100 times, you could practice it, you could theory craft it, you could work out the perfect solution to that problem of that game and how to win it. And then when you rocked up to the table, you wouldn't have to be thinking about decisions in the moment, you wouldn't have any pressure, you already know exactly how it's going to play out. Your opponent's done this, okay, I do that. Your opponent does this, okay, I do that. And you're pretty much guaranteed to win, or at least you have a much higher chance to win. And it really came to fruition for me, certainly, when this really solidified for myself. I had a tournament series just recently, a few months ago, and I was doing quite well. I was looking like I was going to take the whole series for the year, but I just needed to win one game in the final round of the final RTT. 1 out of 3 games, all I needed to do to win to take the series. And so I actually had a week before when the pairings went up, and I was playing against quite a tricky player who's Tom Carr, actually, who's playing at the WTC. And he's a really good player, and he's playing Yanari, and it was pretty bad matchup for me. It was pretty much whoever rolls first gets first turn. So I spent a week preparing for it. I theory crafted. I played the match, probably 5-6 times. I had an idea for every single thing that was going to happen. And when I rocked up to the table, it was funny watching. He's a very good player, but it was funny watching all the things that I knew were mistakes. And at the moment, he didn't think there would be a mistake or not. He thinks he's made a decision, but I know I played that. I know what happens when you do that. It doesn't quite work out. And it was really informing for me. Now, the thing is, you don't always have a week to prepare for every game of Warhammer.
Yeah, most normal people aren't like you, buddy.
I had 7 pages of notes for that game because I wanted to win it. But it was funny. I would never do that process again, or maybe for another big tournament. But it was interesting to go through that process and realize how much of an effect it had. It made the game very easy for me because it took away the control and the decision making. I already knew exactly what I was going to do in every situation. But I think what we can take away from that is there's lots of things you can do in your games just in the 10 minutes when you rock up. And we're going to cover some of those ideas now. So basically, we sort of put a couple of bullet points down. So the first we want to talk about is know your enemy and have a playbook for generalists. We'll go into detail on that. Then we'll talk about questions to ask your opponent pre-game, and I think that's really key because that will divulge some of their strategies and some of their ideas, and you can start to work counters and plans for it and not be caught off guard. Overall target priority. It's a fairly simple one. Win conditions, how you're going to win that game, deployment, and then eventually we'll finish on play style. So we're going to go into a huge amount of detail on each of those points. There's quite a lot there, but that's the general sort of tactics video that we're going to go through today. So do you want to start talking with us, Andy, about knowing your enemy and having a playbook for them?
Yeah, absolutely. So the way I go about these things is that obviously I'm not quite as in depth as you, but what I do is I've got generic plans for my army, say Custodes I've been playing at the moment, and how it's going to function against a really mech heavy list such as Imperial Knights, how it's going to function against a Horde list, how it's going to function against a smite spam heavy list, and the things I'm going to do in the way I'm going to deploy and such, so that when I get to the table I go, right, roughly you've got this sort of list. Okay, and part of that is you list build to try and give yourself more options so that you can do those things, don't you?
And we covered that in the list building phase.
Yeah.
So yeah, when you've written that into list, you already have a playbook for that. You know, if I come up against knights, I'm going to do this.
Yeah.
If I come up against horde, I'm going to do that. And it means that you're not in the moment going, oh God, how am I going to deal with this? You already know exactly what you're doing.
So the point here is that you've got a rough idea when you pitch up to the table what you're going to do, and then it's you get hold of your opponent's list, and this is where you refine your strategy to what is a generic strategy and go, right, for this specific player, this is what I'm going to do. So the things I look at, and this is all about just really trying to figure out your opponent's list. Okay, what is his list doing? So if I'm playing against Dark Angels, for example, there's one or two builds out there, but what you're going to look at his list and go, okay, he's brought 2 or 3 units of Hellblasters. They're based around a Dark Shroud. He's got a Primaris Lieutenant there, so you're getting an idea that he's going to be playing a very castle heavy list. He's probably going to have Azrael in there. He's going to stack all of his buffs together, and he's probably going to deploy in one corner.
Yeah, and that's the key bit of information from the takeaway from that. You already know he's going to be clumped, so your plan can start to be thinking, okay, if he's clumped, what could I do? Could I be spread out? Can I take board control? Yeah.
Sometimes if you've never played against the army at all, you may not know, but usually they've got one big shiny model in their list, like a Castellan, and everything else is built around that Castellan, isn't it?
I mean, actually, if we're gonna, it's not when we say a single model, it can actually be a number of models, but it's normally whatever's the most amount of points. So if you look at their list and something's got one unit's like 600 points, it's probably their list is built around that. So if you look at my list, my Nurgle list that I played in that Nurgle Demons battle report we did, the box riders are 600 points. So yes, everything in my list is about making those box riders work. That would be the same with Warlock Skyrunner Concave, for example, is about 700 points. Yeah. Pretty much the whole list is built around that, etc. So it's whatever's the most value is probably a good starting point.
Good. And the next thing I look at in their list is I go, right, what has he got in his list which can counter mine? So at the very basic level, if I was playing something like Imperial Knights, I'd look, right, where's his heavy weapons? Yep. What is going to be my target priority when I start playing? What things am I worried about?
Yeah.
And then you also think, is there a way that I can mitigate those threats that he's got?
Yep.
So you're thinking, right, how's his list function? What is he going to do to give me problems, basically?
Now, if I could just take this one further step. So this is stuff you can do in the setup, particularly with the new Eternal War missions, or the new chapter approved missions, where you're deploying your whole army, they're deploying their whole army. If they win and they're going to deploy first, they've got about 20 minutes or so, 10, 20 minutes when they're setting up. That's plenty of time to think about all of this. But oftentimes, you will rock up to a table and start deploying straight away, and you don't have much time for this. So as much as possible, you want to take these ideas and principles that we're going to cover today, and like the things you've just said there, and try and plan them before you even get to the tournament. In the list building phase or in the play testing phase, you want to be going, right, what happens when I play knights? What is my strategy? What works? What doesn't work? So that's one less thing to think about when you're rocking up to the table and you're thinking about deployment and objectives and the mission and things like that.
I mean, these are all things to think about. In a minute, we're going to go over what are my sort of 5 or 6 top questions I ask my opponents when I come up and play them. But for the moment, let's keep on point. So the things I look at, what is their big unit. Then I ask, you try and figure out what the key strategies or combo they're going to use with that. Whether it's a particular stratagem or sometimes it's an odd relic. Always pay attention to the relics, because that's sometimes where some of the weird stuff starts happening.
Absolutely. I've just a bit of an anecdote. The tournament played recently, I've come up against Deathwatch in the final round. He had that relic battle cannon from the Emperor's Fist, I think it is.
Yeah.
And it's like flat 3 damage, 2d6 when it doesn't move. Oh man, that's tearing me apart. And I wasn't even thinking about it. I don't think there was much more I could have done, but sometimes, you may focus on that. I'll take that unit out first, and that 3 damage is going to mean my big stuff's going to last a little bit longer. Oftentimes they have 1 or 2 tools for each type of list, because you can't plan for it all when you build a list. And if you can take that tool out, all of a sudden you're going to have the advantage in the game. So identifying it in the pre-game planning stage is really important. Not letting it hit you and go, oh god, that was a lot worse than I thought it was going to be.
Or for example, Dark Eldar, they have the Vexator Mask. Now that is huge if you're trying to play an assault army against them. And really just as soon as you figure out what it is, you're right. Okay, there are ways around that sort of. By the way, I've done an awesome tactics video on getting around the Vexator Mask. But so know the relics. Really pay attention for that. And then, like Lewis was saying, figure out what your opponent's going to do. Is he going to hide in a corner?
Yeah.
Has he just brought a million Custodes jet bikes or a whole bunch of gallants? Is he just going to charge straight in your face?
Yeah. Yeah.
Figure out what he's going to want to do.
Yeah, and I would say that that comes a lot from experience, and experience is just playing games, even against people who aren't great. Just find a game, play it out, understand what those do. A good example for if you've not played Tau recently, or in 8th edition much, they can be very strong. They tend to castle up, they overlap their buffs, and and there'll be a fire in their Overwatch, and everything gets to fire Overwatch. If you haven't played against the list that does that, and you come flying and you go, right, I'm going to charge my 10 berserkers into you, and then you realize that his entire army is overwatching you and you've lost those 10 berserkers, and all of a sudden you go, oh, I have no plan for this, I don't know what I can do, that was my plan. But if you've played before, you go, okay, well, maybe I charge the rhino in first, or maybe I try and get a couple other units or get out of range of some or whatever. But that's what that list does. You've experienced it before, and you know what your game plan is against it. You know what part of your list can take the Overwatch and what can't. So you don't just experience it in the moment, in the game, in the tournament. You've experienced it before. So again, like everything, there's no short for experience, for sure.
Yeah, and also when you're thinking about what your opponent does, is he going to charge you and so forth? Also think, does he have an alpha strike? And again, that's something you've got to really prepare for. And alpha strikes today, they don't just come down turn 1. Sometimes they come down turn 2, and that's going to really factor into your pre-game planning. Are you going to have to screen turn 1 really far out, or can you hide your screen, out of line of sight, and really just bring in your screen turn 2 and turn 3 once you know he's coming down?
Just planning for that, just having it in your mind. It's very hard to determine exactly and for us to dictate this is the best thing to do in every game, but just knowing, right, okay, I'm playing the Bloodletter Bomb, turn 2 I'm going to be faced with 60, 90 Bloodletters coming down. How do I deal with that? And then when you rock up to the table, you have an experience of it, about the screening and things like that. You don't just get hit by and go, oh god, you're trying to play proactively rather than reactively. I think that's the key to what we're saying.
So another good example that would be, say if he's got a bunch of obliterators, let's keep things simple. That those obliterators are all going to deep strike in and they're going to cause you problems. If that's what he's going to do with them. So that they've got a 24-inch range, so you need to screen out your important units by 24 inches by turn 2. That is your game plan. And that's because that's how his list is going to work.
Yeah, and to be honest, if you look at his list, and he's playing an obliterator heavy list, and he's got 3 squads, he's got 600-700 points in obliterators and characters there. That's the main bulk of his list, right? For the most part, that is going to be like his hammer, and then he's probably got some battalions and stuff to fill out CP. So if you can find a way to neuter that or to mitigate it entirely, you're going to have a massive advantage in the game. So screening out is obviously one good idea, but the other thing is, if you play a few games, you realize they've only got 4-inch move. So if you can create your targets to be in a position where they have to advance, or they have to just get out of range, or maybe spend a turn getting into range of something that they want to shoot, they come down turn 2, turn 3, they're trying to move to get into range, turn 4 they finally unload their payload. Well, turn 4 the game's going to be a very different prospect to where it would be turn 2, and that could be enough for the win. So these are the kind of things we're talking about. The last thing I just want to, we'll come on to now to questions to ask your opponent pre-game. I think the last thing I just want to cover in there is there is a lot of things you can do with some of the big scary lists that really do just mitigate them. We've used the example of obliterators there, but I think knights is one of the easiest things to talk about. Move blocking close combat knights literally takes a 300-400 point model off the board, and if you have a strategy for doing that in your list, and it can be anything. I mean, we did a little video on bolter drills, and I just mentioned the bikes there, for example, and as I said, you can move 3 bikes up, you can move them sideways, you can put that between 2 blocks of terrain that knight can't move. If you have a plan for it, then you're going to be looking for opportunities to execute that plan, and you'll find that gives you the advantage.
If you guys ever want to see a battle report where you see a whole bunch of beautifully painted Imperial Knight Gallants just not move for the entire game, check out one of our recent battle reports.
Absolutely.
And a very, very wound up Knights player.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I've just brought a Hellblade, 130 points, literally just to move block knights. It's going into my death card list. It just flies up there, turns sideways, and they can't move. That is the solution to that problem. And I don't need to think about the knights so much. And I've got other tools for other things. So
that's cool. And I think probably the last thing to mention is probably key moments in your opponent's list.
You mentioned the second turn alpha strike, it's often called a beta strike, but there'll be certain things they're expecting to do. If we come back to Knight's House Tyrannus, for example, that knight dies, it falls over, and then at the end of the phase it gets back up, and then for 1 CP it's back on final full ability. If you don't know that, then that happens to you. It's one of those kind of gotcha moments, and it's very hard to come back from that in a game if you weren't expecting it, you weren't planning for it. But if you know they're doing it from the outset, and the whole thing that they're waiting for doing is for doing that moment, then you've got the advantage because you know that they're waiting to save their CP for it, they're waiting for an opportunity to use it, and you can, their mind's caught up on that moment, and you can be taking the game elsewhere, knowing that they're going to do it, but you weren't sinking too much into it. Whatever the plan is, you know that it's coming, and you can again be proactive rather than reactive.
Okay.
So let's go into the questions that you would have asked your opponent pre-game, and then how that would fold into your plan for the game. So if you want to take it away, Andy.
Yeah, absolutely. So these are the first things I asked an opponent. First thing I ask them about is ask them if they got any weird deployment shenanigans. So infiltrators is the first thing I ask them about. Then the next thing I ask them about is any weird sort of redeployment shenanigans, because these things can be absolutely huge, particularly when you're counter deploying opponents now. With the new chapter approved missions, where one of you sets up, then the other one. There's no point banking on setting up and countering your opponent if you know he's just going to change it all afterwards.
So an example of that would be Phantasm for the Elder. Pick up 3 units and move them around. I think the Necrons have something similar for the D3 units with the Deceiver. There's a couple of things out there. You may know about them already, but it's always worth asking the question, because you come up against a list, and if you don't ask the question, and for some reason there's been some weird chapter-approved change, or there's a lot of beta rules coming out in
White Dwarf
at the moment, and it's going to be hard to keep on top of that. We're already pretty loaded down with rules. I think it's good for the game, but you might not be aware of it. So just ask the question every time, so you don't want to get caught out of it. You're trying to avoid any opportunity, like I said, those gotcha moments where you're like, oh, I didn't know you could do that. It's like, well, you could have known if you asked, or if you had, looked at it before. So we're trying to just make sure you're mitigating that opportunity as much as possible.
Because basically your opponent is obliged to answer your questions and tell you about his army, but what he's not going to do is tell you his game plan. And I don't think that's fair. I mean, I certainly wouldn't tell an opponent my game plan. I'm not going, all right, I'm going to move them all over here, so whatever you've set up there is going to be out of range.
No, I totally agree. I mean, like my Nurgle list, for example, is a little bit unusual because I've got these Pox Riders that constantly come back. And the thing is, if I don't tell you, it is going to change your game plan, because you've got, I've killed 3 of them, brilliant. Okay, I've whittled them down. The unit's almost like 2/3 dead, or 1/3 dead. And then I'm like, oh no, I bring 3 of them back. And it's like, that just isn't fun for the game, and also it's not a good way to win. So it's important for me to tell you at the beginning of the game that that's what I'm planning on doing, and that's how it works. But similarly, you should ask.
But certainly that is relying on your opponent to be nice to you. Which is not what we're about here. We're basically saying this is how you lock down and make sure that you're getting the right answers. Similarly, with infiltrators, when do they appear? Are they appearing in the deployment phase, or are they appearing at that weird little bit after the game starts, but before the first turn? What the hell were rules writers thinking there? But anyway, it's a phase which isn't a phase, but sometimes they come down.
It's like the end of the movement phase as well. This is not a phase, but is a phase.
You gotta love those things. Right. Okay, now we're going to get on to probably the most important thing.
We will come to the most important. Just the last point I want to say with that is, with the redeployment stuff, it also goes through into things that happen later in the game. I got absolutely my teeth kicked in. Playing against Blood Angel Smash Captains when they first came out, and I kind of heard about them, but I hadn't played a game against them. And redeployed like turn 5 out of Deep Strike, 3d6 charge, my backline, killed the characters, taken the objective, and that sunk in. That hit me so hard. I didn't ask the question, didn't think to ask it, but that won him the game. It was a very tight game, and that won it, and that was on top tables for second place. So it really was a big moment for me. And now every time I'm like, what does this do? Have you got? It's just a simple question. Have you got any way throughout the game to redeploy something? And funny enough, as I mentioned, playing against Deathwatch, he said, well, I can teleport my guys back to this teleport homer. I've been a long time since I read the Deathwatch book. I didn't know that. Now he didn't end up using that in the game because I killed all the homers and it was no problem. But I had not asked the question. He wasn't obliged to tell me. And you know what? Late game with Deathwatch unit veterans or whatever teleporting backfield to clear out the 5 guys I've got holding objective, that would have screwed me over. So it just asks these blanket questions, and if they don't tell you, then either they don't have it or they're lying. But you can't control it more than that.
Yeah.
So what was the most important thing?
Okay, I think we've teased them for enough. So I personally think the most important thing to have right in your head is threat rangers.
Yeah.
By far the most important. So what I mean by a threat range is, let's say it's for shooting, because it works for combat as well. So for shooting, it is
the model's range with its gun plus its movement, and if it's an assault weapon or it's got a way of assaulting and of advancing and shooting, then it will be plus its advanced move as well.
Yeah, which is a D6. It's quite hard to determine that, but I just say, just imagine.
What is your maximum range?
Yeah.
And for assaulting units, it will be what's your movement plus your charge plus any other shenanigans they can do. So can they move again, and can they advance and charge and so forth. So they're your threat ranges. So when you set up, you've got to make sure that you're not within a certain range of things. To keep the simplest thing, Razorback, for example, you can deploy at 24.1 inches to make sure you're always -1 to hit against a Razorback, because it has to move to be able to shoot you.
Yeah, which is a good tactic in itself. You're probably not going to avoid it entirely.
Or you could get all the way even further back just to make sure that you're completely out of range of it. And it really depends what your army is and what you're playing against.
Absolutely. If I can just ask, so I give an example of the question to ask you: have you got any way to redeploy, and have you got anything that you can redeploy late game? That's a simple question. It's a blanket question. It's not specific to an army. And I think this is the same case for this question. Once you're deployed, or as you're going through things, just when people say play by intent, that really you can do that by asking the question. You say, I've placed this here because I don't believe you've got anything in range that can shoot it. Can I just confirm that? And if they go, well, actually, I don't know if you know, but this is some relic special gun that has an extra 12-inch range. Oh, okay, so I need to place it here for it to be out of range of that. Yes. Now we all know, we've all agreed that that's out of range. Yeah. And those kind of questions means there's no gotcha moments later in the game. It's not like, oh, I thought that only had 24-inch range. Well, if you'd asked me, I'd have told you it was in range. I wondered why you would put it there. That's a question that gets said a lot in Warhammer, and it's just because you didn't ask it properly, I think.
So keeping on with the shooting, I think it's important things to ask are, can you snipe characters? And can you shoot out line of sight?
Yeah, and that comes really some missions that comes absolutely key. I was playing the character one where you have the intel on 3 characters.
Yeah,
and straight away the first question: have you got any single thing that can target my character when it's in wrapped up in a unit? Because that could be a psychic power, it can be a sniper, it could be a stratagem that gives you a sniper ability, like the Chakari one that lets the Prophets of Flesh or something, it gives you the sniper ability. It's worth asking these questions and keep it kind of catch-all. I'm not specifically asking you, do you have any snipers? I'm saying, do you have any way to kill this model right
absolutely,
now? Where if he's here, can you shoot him? No. Okay, good. That's all I need to know. So it's these really generalized questions, and then you won't get caught out, I think.
So and then depending on the type of army that my opponent has, the next things I ask are, if he's a combat army, can you advance and charge?
Yep.
Have you got any psychic power, stratagem, any way of doing it? Like Lewis says, just keep it really generic and vague so that he's obliged to tell you.
Yeah.
Because you will get some people, technically, we are all war gamers after all.
Yeah.
Well, technically.
Yeah, you asked me if I had any snipers, and this isn't a sniper. He's a missile launcher that can target characters. It's like... So, but I think when you bring it, as I said, really to clarify that point, if you ask the question, I'm going to do this, and I'm doing this because I expect that means you can't do anything to him, is that true or is that false? They can't find any loophole in that. They have to say, no, I can shoot it, or no, I have this thing. And I think it's very clear when you talk like that.
Okay. For example, maybe a bit generic, but you can say, have you got any way of doing a turn 1 charge?
Yeah.
Yeah. Pre-game moves is another huge one for assault armies.
Yeah.
If you're playing against Blood Angels and you've got some psychotic slam captain run across the board in front of you, like, what the hell is going on here? I thought I'd measured my ranges, but no, right? Okay, he's moved another God knows how many inches before the game started.
And it will catch you out. It will catch you out as well. Like, it's just anything that can advance and charge. It doesn't need a long movement to be able to make it. I play my Playtoads, they go 7-inch. Then they advance to D6, but it's +1, and then they charge 2D6, but it's +1. They can make first-turn charges at 24-inch ranges. Yeah. It's tight. It's normally like a 10-inch charge, but they can do it. And so, that will catch you out. You ask, how far does that move? 7 inches. Okay, I'm fine here. And all of a sudden, 24 inches later, I'm in combat. So it is worth asking.
The other thing worth asking is turn 1 deep strike. There are a few things which can do it.
Zangors are a good example. I love the Zangor bomb.
Yeah, I mean that's debatable, that one. Some tournaments rule it one way or another. The slam captains can do it, obviously, with a redeploy. And it's just really just clarifying, because that's going to massively influence how you set up, whether you're going to be using your quite tight little screen in there or hiding out a line of sight, or whether you're going to be pushing your screen forwards before the game even starts.
Yeah. And we cover some of these in the tips and tricks, and we'll go into these kind of minutiae things in more detail. But it's just the general be aware of these things is the kind of point of this video.
Because it's going to alter everything about how you're going to deploy. And probably the last thing to talk about is psychic powers.
Yeah, absolutely. And just knowing which models have got which psychic powers and the ranges of those, and things like if there needed to be the nearest model or not. Some things can catch you out with that. I think the Astropath has got one that does mortal wounds on a 2 and then a 3 and then a 4 and then 5 or whatever, and that's targetable. But other ones, it has to be the nearest model. So just being aware of that. If you ask the question, he does this, and you expect it to be the nearest model, and then also he's targeting you all on popping him. It's one of those gotcha moments. So it's just asking these kind of questions.
Okay, so they are my top tips of things to ask your opponent pre-game.
Yeah. I think what we'll do with those, if I could just interrupt, we'll take all those questions and we'll put them in the video description, so that you can have a little script sheet that you guys can ask yourself or write out. So you're just for the first couple of rounds when you're practicing this, you can ask these questions directly, and then obviously they'll come part of your memory bank. You won't need the script sheet anymore. Yeah.
So guys, just to clarify, this is what I think is important, and on the channel here we like people to sort of comment and say, actually you're missing something. This is the most important thing, Andy. What the hell are you on about? And that's really good, because we're all learning, to try and get better as well. So if you think we've missed anything, please comment on it.
Yeah, I must admit we sort of prepped for this video about a week or so ago, and I was going to play a tournament at the weekend with it, and I was asking myself these questions. I don't really normally, I kind of do it a little bit subconsciously, but because we talked about it, we read it down, I was specifically asking myself these questions, and I really felt, even myself, I had a big improvement on my game and my play as a result of it, because I was thinking about things I wouldn't necessarily have thought about before. I was being very clear about my intent. I was asking the right questions, and it's at all levels of play, it's worth doing. I definitely ask you to improve yourself. So,
and I think that little list there, that can really help you out if you come against an army you've not played against. I mean, there's no substitute for playing against an army a bunch of times with your army, but even then there's different builds of it, so it's really important just make it a habit to go through these.
Okay, well, let's move on then. So the next thing that we said we'd talk about was target priority, and just overall target priority, what your plan for the game is. I'm going to shoot this unit first and that unit, but sometimes it doesn't always work out like that. So it's rather than be specific about it, I think being more generalized is, it would be good if this unit was as off the board as soon as possible.
then I'm going to just go away.
A good example of that is when I started this conversation, obviously I said I was prepping for that game, and I knew for me that my Ravagers were key to me winning this game, so it's really important that I kept them alive. Similarly, I knew that his spears, obviously double Yanari spears list, the spears really had to die first. I could pretty much weather everything else. So I knew that was my target priority. I also knew that should have been my target priority from him, and he didn't really target them, or he struggled to get to them, and I focused my entire game plan on keeping them alive, and that was the difference with the win, because 2 turns of Ravagers shooting spears is not going to go well. So it's important to understand your target priority and then also your enemy. But if you want to go, you've probably got a little bit more detail, Andy, that you can give us.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple of things with target priority, and I think there's something. Basically, you've got to try and understand what you definitely need to kill and what things are just scary, aka the distraction card effects in the room, like the big Imperial Knight Gallant, who, if you've got a bunch of guardsmen, you can block him out. You don't actually need to deal with him, but you probably do need to deal with a bunch of mortars or something just completely destroying all your army. Whatever it is you need to deal with, you've got to actually figure out in your head what your actual target priority is. Or if you're playing as Imperial Knights, you probably need to deal with a Shadow Sword. I'm just saying.
Yeah. Well, it depends on the mission as well, because some missions, especially now, some of the Eternal War ones, it's like, if a unit has fly, it automatically takes the objectives. It's like, and troops don't. So all of a sudden, actually now my target priority comes fly. It might not even be that their fly is the most scary thing. It's just, if I kill it all, then they can't take the objectives. If I've got loads of fly up on the game, regardless of whether I actually table them or not, or get the momentum.
So we'll come on to that a bit more in a minute, because I've got a really good example of how I've done this to one of my buddies, and I hope you won't mind me mentioning it on here. So I think target priority. The other thing when you're thinking about target priority, and this is a little bit within the list planning phase as well, is do a little bit of math hammer, guys. actually figure out what you can kill. There is an absolutely awesome site I'm going to give you a link for here. It's called Fields of Blood.
Oh yeah, I've got that.
So basically, it's designed for 40k, and you just stick in like I have 30 strength 5 shots. There's a -1 to hit, and I reroll all hits, and it just gives you all the things, and it'll tell you on average you'll do this.
And they have a 3 up, 5 up, feel no pain, etc. So you can put all the stats in there, and
it's built for 40k, and it will tell you what you will do on average.
It gives you the variance as well.
Yeah, it gives you everything. Well, it's usually depressingly bad what you can actually kill. It's just
to be honest, I like rolling the dice and figuring it out for myself. Honestly, like I'll roll the dice like 50 times. I've got a dice rolling app, and I just put it in there, and I just if I'm shooting this, I'll be hitting on 3s. Okay, that's 20 dice. I'll just as if I'm playing the game, because I feel like it sinks in more like that. You read the stats and you just see it, okay, and you get an idea, and you know that's good, that's bad against shooting those things. But if you've actually rolled the dice and you've had to pick those models up, there's an emotional connection to that strengthens the memory. And I really think like when you've planned to shoot everything at this bloody knight, and it's left on 1 wound, and you think, God, I know I can't kill it. I just know that I've shot that like 5-6 times, and I always have the same kind of effect on it. So I think that's quite important, and that comes back to the play testing. Okay. But there's one thing I've been waiting the series to say it, and I think this is a good time to say it. You will always kill less than you expect. That is just a fact. You may get lucky occasionally. Well, that's because I play Nurgle. I never kill anything. But yeah, you always think you're going to kill something, and it comes up really clear with like people who split fire. They go, okay, I can shoot. I've got say 4 melter guns and then range of 2 targets. I will shoot 3 melter guns at that and 1 melter gun at that. And it's like because in their head they think 3 melter guns are going to kill it, and then they miss with all 3 melter guns, and then all of a sudden they've got 1 melter gun and 1 thing that's done like 3 damage, and they haven't killed the 1 thing that was on like 2 wounds. But if they just shot that last melter gunner, they would have killed, because you always overestimate your ability to kill things. So I think if you were to take that first of all and log that away, then when you're starting to do your planning, you always plan over contingent. I'll shoot everything at it, and if I just kill that. So for example, let's just say 2 knights. Let's say you're playing a 5-knight list, and you go, right, I actually have the ability to kill 2 knights a turn. Let's say you're playing an all las cannon list for some ridiculous reason. I have the ability to kill 2 knights a turn. Well, if you planned in your pre-game and in your plan and everything we're talking about here to only kill 1 knight a turn, then if you happen to kill 2, the game's going to be really easy for you. But if you plan to kill 2 and you only kill 1, the game's going to be really tricky for you. And that's just about expectations. That's got nothing to do with what was actually, the game itself. It's just you start moving models thinking, yeah, that's going to be dead. I don't need to worry about this, and then it doesn't happen like that. And all of a sudden, oh God, it's on 1 wound, and it's a Mechanicus Knight, so it's basically like it's full, and I haven't done anything for a turn. So I think that's really important. One question that I got asked a long time ago, and it really stuck with me, is if you were to shoot 10 Space Marines, I know I've asked you this before, Andy. If you were to shoot 10 Space Marines at 10 Space Marines, okay, just 10 bolt gun Space Marines firing 10 shots at 10 Space Marines. That's like the baseline for 40k really, in terms of stats. How many Space Marines do you think you would kill in doing that? Take a second, just answer it. Don't math hammer it. Just immediately answer yourself.
At least 8. I'm going to say, and the other 2 are going to die in morale.
Well, I remember when I asked you, you said 3. I remember when I asked you, you said 3. And I actually said 3 as well when the person asked me the first time. Well, the math hammer is statistically it's going to be 1.
Yeah.
And that changes your perspective of the game quite a lot. If you think, I was going to kill 5 of those Space Marines by shooting my 10 Space Marines, and you kill 1, you're like, oh, God, that didn't go as well as I thought. But that was always going to be the plan, like if you had a plan for it. So, yeah, it's really key with target priority to understand what you're actually going to do. And that comes through play testing and having a plan for things.
I once read an article by Nick Nanavati, and he said, basically, try and minimise chance in your game. And he says, do that by, don't split fire, just overkill things. He's like, if you're playing against that 2-knight list, okay, will you win if you kill 1 knight a turn? And his answer is probably yes. Will you... It's great if you kill 2 knights, that's fantastic. What happens if you kill no knights because you split fire?
Yeah.
Then suddenly you're in a really bad place. And say there's a 20% chance that you're going to lose the game that turn by split firing.
Yeah, you wouldn't take it. Yeah.
No, when you think about it like that, or you've got a whole bunch of flyers or fire raptors, same thing. Just make sure they're dead if they need to die.
Absolutely. Just overkill. Just always put all the shots in. We're actually going to cover a lot of this in the next video in the series, which is actually called Changing Your Perspective. So we'll go into that detail. That'll be the next video. And I really think that's going to be one of the best videos we'll do in this series. So,
so getting back on point now, because I think we're straying a little bit. The I think the next thing to talk about is what's your opponent going to target? So put yourself in his shoes and go, right, okay, I'm a Dark Angels player. I've got my Dark Shroud. He's got a bunch of shooting stuff. He's going to target my Dark Shroud, isn't he?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Because he of course he's going to do that. It's the key to your list. If he was rocking up the table and he'd watched this video and he was planning, he'd go, right, Dark Shroud gives it -1 to hit. It's pretty key. Once I break that, I kind of crack the nut. I can get in at the juicy stuff. So that's going to be his plan. Well, you knowing that he's going to be his plan, how empowered are you to make a decision about what you want to do? Do you want to give him your Dark Shroud? Do you not want to give him your Dark Shroud? You get the choice rather than him. He's going to do that regardless.
But what happens if he knows that I know that he knows?
Oh, well, that's when true 40k happens. And then it gets very, intellectual at that point. And then it's down to the dice after that. So, yeah.
But seriously,
basically what I say, if I take that as an example, if you have one knight in your list, okay, actually your Deathwatch player talked about this quite a lot, and I really thought it was a good thing, and I would like to pick up on it and just hammer it home, really, is that, he had one knight in his list. He knows that most people are going to look at that knight and try and kill it. And if he's playing against like a knight's list, that was his answer to knights. So he had a choice. If he puts it at the front, he knows you're going to shoot it, and that you'll kill it. If he puts it way at the back, he can't shoot, but you can't shoot it. It's his choice. The opponent gets no impact in that decision. The opponent gets given what they're given. They either have an opportunity shot or they don't. So it's down to him to plan out whether he thinks it's important for him to keep that knight alive or whether he can sacrifice it. If we flip it around, for him it was very important that it stayed alive, so he used to keep it back. But if we look at Don Huson, who played a fantastic Light Lord Terminator list back in 1 BAO at LV, 1 BAO last year, he had a knight in his list, single knight in his list, and his objective was to put it forwards and be the threat that it would die. It would always die turn 1. He knew it. That was the whole plan. But it was redundancy in his list. He knew that every person was going to target prioritize that, and he built a list that required that to die so it could do what it could do. And it's once you understand what the opponent's going to do, you have so much information, you can make the decision how the game's going to play out. So really key, as long as you have a plan for it. Don't just go, I'm going to put it here, oh, it's dead, oh, what do I do now?
Okay.
I'm going to put it here because it's going to die because I'm going to do this.
So getting back to practical advice here, so the things you can do realistically are: 1, put it in reserve. 2, you can deploy it out of range. And that may even be out of range of your own guns to be effective, but maybe half of your guns will be effective. So the Imperial Knight, it's got a battle cannon which can shoot across the table. The rest of its guns will be out of range. But if he does that for 5 turns, that's better than having 1 turn potentially of shooting all the shots.
Another example, if you're using like Predators, for example, you might want to hide them behind terrain so they can't be shot first turn, and then you move them out. They're at -1 to hit, but whatever happens, they're not dying first turn. You take the -1 to hit, but that means you protected them for a turn. So you have the choice when you know what they're going to target.
Line of sight is massive. Line of sight, just deploy it where they can't see it. So I think they're the main things to ask there. So I think this is my favorite part coming up now, and this is playing the mission.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, there's 2 ways to win 40k. You either kill your opponent to the point where they can't come back and they just can't hold points, and you basically table them. Even in the new missions where tabling doesn't actually win, if you basically table them by turn 2, turn 3, you're going to win the mission, aren't you? Or you play a game where you are just stalling for 5 turns. And not stalling by playing slow. You're just offering stuff up, giving trades, but winning objectives, and then it comes to the end of the game and you count up and you've got more than they have, even if you have less models. I'm such an advocate for the second part of play because I think it's totally in your control. The first one, you're reliant on dice, you're reliant on killing stuff, you're reliant on coming against a list that isn't trying to do that to you and getting an upper hand. I think if you just focus on playing the mission, then you can win the mission. But that means that every mission is different, every tournament has different mission packs. It's very hard to keep consistency through that. So you end up changing your list a lot depending on what you're playing. But it is a good strategy.
So I've come to this way of thinking probably a little bit later than you, but figuring out what your win condition is. So for example, I always used to play against my buddies Imperial Knights with my Custodes. He had 3 Imperial Knight Gallants and a Castellan. And if I charged at him, he could kill me by turn 2, no matter what the mission was. Now we're playing endgame objectives a lot of the times, and I figured out actually if I just stay away from him and put most of my army in reserve, let him go first, he's only got 2 or 3 turns of trying to shoot his Imperial Knight at me, and then my entire army's obsec and none of his is. All I do is shoot his troops and then just stay away from him. He kills a third. He's got 2 turns of shooting his Castellan at me realistically, and then I just sit on the objectives. I've got the bottom of the turn. I win every time, and every time we play it now, I win.
Because you've planned it out. you've practiced it, and you know that plan works, and you walk up to the table and it's easy mode.
Yeah, it is, and it's a really big, bad, scary
Yeah.
list, but that's how you beat it. And the second idea is that once you figured out how you win, figure out how you lose as well, and don't fall into that trap. So for me, losing that game was riding my Custodes gloriously towards all of his Imperial Knight Gallants and just staying out in the open and then letting his Castellan shoot me. It just is never going to work.
Yeah.
Every time I play that, I die within 2 turns.
Absolutely. And you can take that principle, and that's against knights, but you could follow that through to, playing, I don't know, like maybe a bunch of Lehman Russ Punishers or like 4 or 5 of them, or that sort of thing. There's other similar style lists that essentially are basically the same setup, and you're going to have the same problem against those as well. So once you've got a playbook for one particular type of list that's very meta dominant, when you come up against something that's a bit quirky, a bit different, but you can see it's basically the same list, even though the units are different and the models are different, it's a different army. It's going to play style that's going to be the same. Then obviously you can follow that logic through and go, well, let's try what I do against knights and see if it works here. But win conditions, win conditions are obvious when you're talking about objectives, because that's the mission, right? You take objectives. But win conditions is very dependent on the army that you're playing. I mentioned earlier about how important Ravagers were to the Craftworld list that I was playing before. I had 5 planes, Ravagers, and Craftworld, and it was absolutely key to me that those Ravagers stayed alive. They really absolutely won the game, and I had enough kind of other threats that if I did enough with them to make them kind of scary, people would focus them, and I'll be fine. Like if someone shot down one of my Crimson Hunters and they shot everything at it, I was really happy with that, because that meant they weren't shooting the Ravagers. So what I would do is I would play almost kind of like tentatively on the first round with the Ravagers, so they don't kind of seem so scary in comparison to everything else. And I play super aggressive with everything else. I fly my lights up, my planes up there. I do, for example, I have a Crimson Hunter. It's -1 to hit because it's a plane. It's another -1 because it's Altiok, but that's only outside 12-inch range. I would move it within 12-inch range of an enemy, so they of melter guns or whatever, or of a knight or whatever. So they go, oh, that's within 12-inch range, and they target it. They target it because they've got an opportunity to get what they think is an advantage on it. But I've deliberately done that because I know that's what they would do. So I'd set that plane up. I go, oh, it's within 12 inches. Oh, well, that's fine. Yeah, it doesn't get its -1 to hit. They'd shoot it, they kill it, and my Ravagers survive a turn. So that was for me. I knew those Ravagers have to survive, and I will sacrifice them. It's a game of chess. I'd sacrifice, a bishop for a queen every day. So.
Okay. So the other thing to think about is, what does your opponent need to win the game?
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, I was playing against Simon, who's on this channel as well. We're playing one of the new Chapter Approved missions. We both had the Loyal 32. He had his Knights, I had my Custodes. Now we're playing the one where troops score the objectives. Now Simon, this is the first time we played, and Simon didn't quite understand the mission. So he lined his Loyal 32 up on the line. I'd put mine behind cover out of line of sight. I stole the initiative. I just put most of my bikes forwards. Now I probably sacrificed 300 points of my army, probably more like 500 points of Custodes to do this, and I killed every single one of his troops. Now he can't score any points for the rest of the game. All I need is 1 point, and I've won the game. And I got
and that's the mentality that comes from not thinking too much about the mission, I think, because you're used to them being your chaff, them being your screen. But if the mission is
the Custodes were my screen this time.
Exactly, they're the missions are the thing that score become the most important thing in your list. That mission where the Eternal War mission where you got fly. Before I always play my Demon Prince very suicidal with my Nurgle list. He's not my Warlord anymore. He runs out there, he takes some hits and he dies. But I was thinking, you know what? He can just nab points away from people. I was playing so cagey with him. Turn 1, turn 2. I was getting him moved up in bulks of other models so that he could just fly out and steal that objective. Yeah. I would never play that, but in that mission, that was mission critical. That was my win condition. Was that my fly stuff was alive to take points.
But that's the thing. You have to figure out what your opponent's is as well. So for Simon, it was, I need to kill his Imperial Guard. And, if you go up against most Imperial Knight players, just kill the Guard straight away if you want to win the mission.
Yeah.
But, it could be anything, but you just figure out how, and it could be, if you're playing the older missions, right, your opponent has to table you. He can't win on points. There's no way he can win on points. He has to table you. Right. Yeah. How do you stop yourself getting tabled?
Yeah,
how much can you put in reserve? Can you stick everything out of line of sight? Do you just not engage them?
Yeah, no, I honestly, this is pretty much the crux of this. I'm glad that we kind of reached this towards the end of the video, because really you can plan for most stuff in 40k. And if you've identified that the win condition of your opponent is that he'll table you, like the list I just mentioned with the 5 planes and their averages, I had to table. I'd never get the points. I don't have any troops. I had 3 infantry models, and everything else was vehicles and was planes and stuff. But I for turn 5, and it was always a push. All they needed to do to beat me, if they replayed the game that they had lost against me, was just waste the first turn. Just hide everything. Don't shoot a single thing at me. Just spend one more turn, so that now all of a sudden I'm telling you turn 5, turn 6, and I'm actually, there's 2 rolls to end the game before I finally get that table off. That was all you needed to do. And it's funny. People feel like, no, I've got to get out there. I've got to get aggressive. I've got to play.
Yeah.
And that is not the game.
So killing stuff doesn't actually win you points in a lot of these missions. The only thing killing gets you is, assuming you can't table someone, is it gets you board control to get objectives. So if you can't really score objectives, then even if you've got that board control, you're not going to be able to do anything with it. So
it does give you momentum as well. That will be something.
It does stop your opponent scoring objectives. There are some points to it, but if you're physically just going to not kill something and you're going to hide out of line of sight and keep all your objectives scorers alive, particularly if you're playing end of game objectives, then you're really clued up and just trying to get out of that mentality that beating your opponent into the ground wins you a game.
Yeah, exactly. Because you'll find yourself spending far much time thinking about that and not thinking about winning the game. And you'll look at the score and you'll be behind and you haven't won. You haven't got a table and you haven't won. So it really is very important that.
Okay. So last bit of practical advice for guys playing the mission. This is huge, and this has actually lost me a game in a tournament before because I didn't do it. Write down what the bloody mission is.
Oh yeah, and know the nuance of it. Read the wording. It's only fly that can take that objective. I thought anyone could take it. It's like, well.
And this comes into a little bit of playing the game as well. I have a score sheet, and I write down my opponent got this many points, and keep a track of your secondaries as well, because then you know how many points you need to win. So
and what I think you'll find is that when you start doing that a lot. When you're taking the score and you're keeping track of it, you'll realise how valuable every point is. And very oftentimes you'll find yourself like First Blood, for example. It's like people don't really think about First Blood because you kind of expect that everyone's going to get it, and they don't always. So I have 1 unit of Nurglings in my list, and it's a bit of a liability because it is pretty much First Blood giving up if I try and play aggressive and try and utilise it for what it's in the list for. So I found myself like I either deploy it like miles away from anything, not doing anything because I don't want to give up first blood because that's 1 point, or deploying it and like putting 2 CP into giving it warp surge or something just to keep it alive for that 1 turn. So you've because I know that 2 CP to put warp surge on a squad of bloody 3 or 4 Nurglings, there's no way that makes mental sense. But when you go 2 CP to waste a turn of shooting and mean that you opponent doesn't get a victory point, you're like, I'll play that all day long. So it's that kind of thinking.
And when it's close. For a start, you've got to actually know it's close, and the only way you know it's close is if you've actually kept track of the points.
Yes, exactly.
Because if there's 1 point at the end of the game, and if you just sacrificed a 500-point unit which wasn't going to score you anything, you'd have done it.
The last game I played in that series that I mentioned, the Badminton Cafe, the score going into turn 3 or 4 was 2-1, and his 1 point was my Warlord kill. And then we finished the game 3-2 because of line breaker. And I'm thinking back on that, I was like, that could have been a draw very, very easily. And it could have been his win with just a little misstep. And I think, well, I gave him Warlord really. I kept it quite well for 2 turns, and then turn 3 it was a Demonette Herald, and I just wanted to get some damage off with her, so I moved her forwards, and she died. And I'm just thinking, I just gifted him 1 victory point, which you don't think about that, but when the final score is 3-2, it's like that is like
a lot.
That's half of his victory points I just kept to him. So it really is important to understand that. I think that is key.
So I think what do you think the next thing to talk about is?
It's deployment. I think the last thing we'll talk about. Now, I don't want to go into a huge amount of detail on deployment now, because it is a mammoth tactic and topic, and it covers every single thing. But there are questions to ask yourself in deployment. It's really hard. It depends entirely on the mission set, to be honest, because sometimes there's fixed objectives, sometimes there's not. Sometimes, if you're just playing straight out of the book, you actually lay the objectives and then you roll for the deployment map. So when you're laying the objectives, you don't even know where you're going to be putting the deployment map down. It's very hard to talk about too much in too much detail. But nonetheless, there's still a couple of questions you can ask yourself, and that will inform your pre-game plan. So what sort of questions do you think those are?
So I think the first thing is when you're choosing sides, the thing I ask myself is, right, what does my opponent need? Does he need something for his list to function? Such as like in Reapers, Dark Reapers. Do you give them a nice wall they can fire and fade behind?
Yeah.
Do you give them a nice
Look for
little
that.
castle?
There's a little L shape. There's a little L shape terrain that people use quite a lot, and particularly if it's like the bottom ruins and
Yeah.
they're blocked in, or munition crates that they form a little L shape. People love to put these on tables, and it's a fantastic bit of side blocking terrain. We see it a lot, and I can tell you, I played Janari, I played Dark Reapers, and I played a lot against Dark Reapers, and I can tell you, as we rock up the table, as soon as I'm on table 5, I'm like, where's table 5? Yes, it's got that little L shape, and all they are thinking about is they just want that L shape. That's all they want, and it's like it's the only thing in their mind as part of the deployment. So if you have the opportunity to take it away, maybe that's the only bit of terrain on the board, or maybe taking that side of the board is going to be really tricky for you to play from because of your style army. But if you take that away from them, it makes such a huge difference to their list and also to their mentality about their list, because that was all they were thinking about, and they don't have it. There's a big advantage there to be had, and then you can just play from it anyway. So.
Yeah, I think the other things we've already covered, such as what are they going to deploy like? Do you need a screen turn 1? Do you hide your screen? Do you bring it up turn 2, turn 3? And I think they're the main things to talk about in that.
Part of this, part of this is to start thinking about your play style for the rest of the game, and this is our last topic. So I think we'll just finish off on this now. It starts in deployment and it goes through. Really, if you had enough time, like coming back to what I said, if you had a week to prepare for a game or 3 months.
No one does this.
But you could play the first turn like 5-6 times, and you would know how they're going to deploy most likely. What they're going to do. The mission I was playing, I knew he was going to put his his shining spears on the back line. I knew he was going to phantasm forwards. It was all things that I knew he was going to do. So what was his first turn looking like? Well, he's going to soul burst one. He's going to quicken the other, advance and charge, and get into combat. That's just going to happen. He hasn't got any other playstyle. It's always going to be that. So I know what turn 1 deployment looks like. I know what turn 1 looks like. I pretty much know what turn 2 looks like because it's 2 letters of spears in my list, in my army. And once you can plan through the first 2 turns, if you've planned them right and if you've got the advantage out of it, you've got the win basically at that point, turn 3, turn 4, turn 5 will play themselves. It really, oftentimes, just getting through the first turn and the second turn in your mindset before you play is really, it can be very important to your strategy.
Yeah. I think there's one other thing we need to cover just before we wrap up, and that is this is massive actually, and this really sets you up for the game. Do you want first turn? If someone was to give you first turn, particularly with these new chapter approved missions, would you take it?
Yeah. Do you know what the funny thing is? I play my Nurgle list, and I have never had first turn because I never take it. I always take second turn. It is always better for me in that list to know what my opponents are doing, because as I said, I've got that 7-inch move of those Pox Riders, and it can just about be 24 inches. But if they move forward 6 inches, it makes it so much better for me. So almost invariably, I give up first turn. But we were playing the new Eternal War missions, and it was the fly mission, as I keep harking back on. Really key game for me, so I think about it a lot. And I wanted it. I knew I just needed first turn because it was just so important for me to get my presence on the board in that particular mission, because the objectives all move about, and I needed to get forwards. I needed to get in there so that when they start moving about, I can start taking advantage of it. And he actually, interestingly, gave me first turn anyway, after I'd already rolled the C's, which I want the C's on, but I was just going to take it. I knew I was going to take it. But then, as you say, that's dependent on whether you're deploying your entire army first or they are, and things like that. So it is, if you think about how it would work if you had first turn, if you didn't have first turn, and you have a plan going into the game, you'll make the right decision at the moment.
So the things I think about to make that decision are, can you survive your enemy's alpha strike? And sometimes the answer is hell no. They've got double Castellan list against my poor Lehman Russ list, and you're like, no, I need first turn. And if that's the case, right, you go for first turn. And sometimes some of the missions really make going second worth it, such as like end game objectives or when they're scored at the end of the battle round. Particularly if you haven't got particularly resilient troops, so if you've got a whole bunch of infantry, they're just going to get shot off an objective, whereas you can toe in if you've got the bottom of the turn. So actually, usually going second plays a lot better for a lot of the missions.
Funny enough, actually, that fly mission, that was part of the reason I just remember that made me want to take the first turn. Is I was reading the ruling, and I have to read it again and just double check I was right with it. But the whoever gets first turn, the objectives move, and then you score at the beginning of your turn. So actually, it's advantageous in that particular Eternal War mission to have first turn, rather than the other missions they're scored at the end of the battle round. But these are scored at the beginning of your movement phase, so it's way better to get into position from that, and then you can shoot them off in their phase. So it was just one of those missions, really weirdly, that is definitely favouring that. And if you play the mission, you know the plan, right? No, I definitely want a first turn in this mission because of that reason. So.
And sometimes it doesn't make a blind bit of difference. So if it's just a score a point at the end of your turn for every objective you're on, a classic progressive one, you might as well go first. Just try and shoot your enemy off the board.
Yeah, there's no loss to go last.
Whereas other ones,
unless you have a list that would have something that's going to happen late game, like when I was playing the summoning bloodletters and I bring them in, turn 4, turn 5, kind of want to go second because like the last minute I've come in and hit a punch that they weren't expecting, get that extra bit of progressive. So it's part of your list.
Yeah, they get less turns to shoot back at you as well. So when I was playing the knights, I get right. He's got 2 turns to shoot his Castellan instead of 3.
Yep.
So the other thing to think about is the new, well, not so new now because 40k moves at such a crazy speed, is the cover stratagem.
Yeah, absolutely. You need to know whether you're going to use it or not. I don't think it shouldn't really be that much of a thought process. But we're trying to mitigate the amount of stuff you have to think about in the game because there's so much to think about, and you mitigate that by already knowing what you're going to do. So like again, we'll come back to the Ynnari game that I was playing that I planned for. When I was playing my practice games, I actually noted whenever I was making my saves what the wounds would have been had I actually used the stratagem versus not using it. And I found just in that particular list, playing against his Ynnari, it was just not worth it. It was basically like 3 or 4 wounds a turn for 2 CP. Yeah. And I was like, 3 or 4 wounds is not going to be the difference between me winning or losing this game. 2 CP, when my list only has 6, is actually the difference between winning and losing the game. So I knew I was never going to use it. It wasn't a question.
So other lists, it's really important. Like if you play Space Marines, giving everything a 2-up save, awesome. But if your opponent's got AP -5 on all of his weapons, it doesn't make a blind bit of difference. So particularly if you're like Custodians or something, you've got Invuns, and he takes AP -2 or 3 to push him up onto their Invuns, depending on whether you're in cover or not.
It is really powerful. I mean, there's times where it's absolutely key. A 3-up save moving to a 2-up save, and if you don't have an invulnerable save, is absolutely huge. But a 3-up save, they got AP -2, and you got a 5-up invulnerable save, or a 4-up save, particularly like I do on the planes. The Razor Wing Jetfighters are 4-up, 5-up. It's like it's not worth it really. They're going to be shooting at stuff with AP -2, so it's just not going to make any difference.
It's just a thing to think about: is will you use it, yes or no? And the answer is usually fairly clear. It's just look at what the AP of their weapons are. Sometimes it's just not going to make a blind bit of difference.
Yeah. Or they're an entire assault army, and then
you play Nurgle and they haven't got any guns. It's like
well, they haven't got any save anyway, so it's not even worth. They got a 7-up save, so it's not even worth giving it for 6 something. But again, if you're playing against an assaulty army, you know that it's not worth it as well. So these are quick questions you can ask yourself right off. But that is, you should know in most cases whether that's going to be viable or not, and not have to think about it in game.
Okay. Okay, so the last thing I want to talk about is whether or not you have whether you've got the advantage in the game or not. And you can rock up to a table, you can go, okay, I can take this, or this is probably not going to do well in this one. And you know that if you're not going to do well in a game, if you play your standard game plan without taking any risks, you're going to lose.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And that is the time to alter up what you're going to do. Take more risks. So is it actually on turn 1, I'm going to split fire and I'm going to kill both of those knights. So I know if I kill 2 knights, I'm back in the game here.
Yeah.
If I don't kill if I kill 1 knight, I've still lost.
Yeah.
If I kill no knights, well, I've still lost anyway, so it doesn't matter. But I know if I kill 2 knights, I'm back in the game.
Yeah. But that can come back to the win conditions as well, because you go, okay, well, I'm normally a killy army, for example, let's just say that, and I'm used to wiping people off the table, but I haven't got first turn, or because I know I'm not going to get first turn, or it's quite unlikely I've got less drops or whatever, and or I'm deploying first and then you turn towards. I'm deploying second, then you turn towards, and I'm playing against a list that's pretty much going to table me. Then you go, okay, well, forget tabling it. That's just not going to happen. How can I win the game on the missions, for example? How can I get the objectives? Okay, there's an objective there, there's an objective there. Well, if I just hide behind this terrain and then I move up and I hide behind that bit of terrain, I can get to that objective turn 3. If I can do that the same on that objective, then actually, okay, round 1 I'm not going to get any objectives. Round 2 I might get a couple, but round 3 I can almost hold them all. And this is maybe a mission where it's very clear, it's just hold 1 each time. And you count it up and go, Yeah, well, there's a chance there that I could
Yeah,
actually just outscore him, regardless of what happens with the shots. Just with the units that I know I can keep safe, things like that. So you go, okay, I'm not going to bring my deep striking, let's say swooping hawks or something like. I'm not going to bring them in and try and do a bit of damage to a loyal 32 and see if I can get them off objective. I'm going to put them down on this objective, and then I'm going to fly them up in the sky, and I'm going to put them over on that side of the table. Or maybe I'm just going to fly them in the sky and keep them down for line breaker, because I know I get a point on line breaker. You start thinking about the game in a completely different
yeah,
perspective.
yeah, absolutely. It's
Really good.
realizing when you have to push, when you have to definitely take those chances.
Yeah,
And equally well, know when you don't have to. If you're up in a game, if you know that actually
yeah,
he has a horde list of cultists, I know I've got more than enough guns to take him. If I just stay on my back line and I've got 2 turns of that and I can move forwards.
yeah,
If I try and move forwards early, he ties up all my units.
yeah,
That's the
yeah.
risk.
I see, that's,
Whatever it is, it's not a well thought through plan there. But the
no,
whole idea
it's,
the whole idea is okay. Do I need to try and kill him a turn earlier if I know I've got this game?
no, I think that's a great
And
example.
then you're suddenly you're putting chance back into that game, which you were almost 100% going to win.
Yeah.
And then suddenly you're giving your opponent a chance to capitalize on potential mistakes you're going to make. And it's just knowing actually, it's just being a little bit more grown up about things and just go, actually, you know what? I don't need to.
Time.
I can take my time. There's 5-6 turns in a game.
I'm going to table him turn 3, turn 4.
Yeah.
So there's no point in me trying to get that, squeezing out, putting, one of my Ravagers, for example, on that point, just so I get that point turn 1. Yes, it gives me another victory point, but I'm going to table him turn 3 anyway. So I'm not going to break my castle. I'm not going to put something out there. I'm going to keep it tight. I'm going to sacrifice that point, and I'm going to put it back, in the later parts of the game.
And it goes back, and this is something, I know it's a little bit off topic, it's just ask yourself this at the start of every turn. How do I win this? How do I lose this?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, I think I actually
just clear your mind at the start of each turn and go, right, how do I do it and how do I F it up? And you will, and then that brings it back to exactly what it is.
And I think just to finish off on the whole topic of the discussion here, if you do that in your playing, in your practice games, and you go to a tournament and you play a list that you played quite a few times, and you're asking yourself these questions every time, and you're doing everything that we've just covered in this quite lengthy video, but it's all good stuff, and you keep building up this repertoire, the level of questions that you can ask yourself, and you add in a few more because you always remember, well, my particular list, I've always got to be careful of this one thing that Lewis Nally didn't mention, but it's really important to my list, so I'll add that to my list of questions. Then what you'll find is that you'll have the answers to them, and then when you come to the next round, you already know, you ask the question, but you're playing 5 nights, you played 5 nights 100 times, exactly the same list. You know the questions you're going to ask, you already know the answers you're going to get given, and you don't need to think about that, and that just becomes part of your skill set. It's just that you are then a better 40k player because you already know the solution to the problems that the game is presenting to you. And then what will happen is then come back to like we were talking earlier, then it gets into the more sort of cerebral stuff where you're playing a player who was also asked those questions and knows the answers, and now it's who can outplay each other and outmaneuver each other, and the risk reward that people take and the dice. Then it is just simply his list was better than mine, or his had the answers to his list could always kill mine. It was always my scissor paper rock sort of situation. So I think that playing it through, then that becomes your plan for the next game, and then when that comes back into pre-game planning. So I think it's all very, very relevant for sure.
Yeah, it is. Okay. It's so I think that's it for this episode.
That is. It was a bit of a long one, but I think it's a really important one. We covered a lot of detail about really how to play the whole game of 40k there, but then how to make it into a plan. So the next session that we're going to do is going to be on changing your perspective. I've mentioned this a few times in the video so far. Honestly, this was the starting point for the whole series for me, so I think it's going to be a fantastic video. It completely, for me, a lot of the things that we're talking about here completely changed my perspective on how I play, and I think that makes that helped me sort of get more competitive and be a better player. It's not going to be so much about tips and, like we mentioned here, about deployment threat ranges. It's not going to be about that. It's going to be more just about how to change your approach to the game and what you think about in your mindset and things like that. So I really would encourage you. I think hopefully it's going to be the pinnacle of the series, and then we'll obviously use it and refer to a lot of videos after that as well. So stay tuned.
Oh, I'm excited. I genuinely don't have a clue what you're on about, but I'm excited to learn about this.
It's going to be very exciting. I hope so. I hope so. Just a very different style video is what I'm thinking. So
yeah, that's really cool. So guys, if you like this video, subscribe to the channel. And let us know what you think. What are your top tips for sort of pre-game planning? Let us know if we missed anything. Let us know what you think about these more long form sit and talks. Obviously, we do our sort of more tidy, like little tactical moment, little tactics videos as well, which are really, really good. They're my favourite part about doing the channel, actually, but I really like doing this as well. So let us know what you think about it, and we'll see you in the next video.
Brilliant. See you later, guys.
See ya.